as it started to become clear that the Walter-type hydrogen peroxide-powered U-boats would take longer to enter service than ideal, the larger Type 18 was adapted into the Type 21 ocean-going submarine. But, with it clear that the Type 9s, which the Type 21s were supposed to replace, and the Type 7s, which they weren't, were both struggling against the latest Allied anti-submarine warfare techniques, there was a clear need for a smaller submarine type. Although the Type 21 could do the job of either a Type 7 or a Type 9 in the deep ocean, it was far too large to be safely used in coastal waters, where the Type 7, and to a lesser degree the older Type 2, were having some success. The Type 17 was a small Walter-powered vessel that had been designed for coastal work, and further work had created a more advanced design from it labelled the Type 22. And so it was decided to try and adapt this into an Electro-Boat in the same way the Type 18 had been turned into the Type 21. But the changes that would be made in this case would be far more dramatic. The Type 22 had a rather low, sweeping faired conning tower and a rather complex hull profile for better hydrodynamics, although testing had shown that its length-to-beam ratio was a bit too short, and it used cut-down torpedoes to fit in the small hull. The new Type 23 went through quite a large number of revisions, ending up being significantly longer, with a far more regular conning tower and hull profile, but was also designed to be constructed and transported in sections, in this case 4 sections each weighing 10 to 18 tons. This would allow the submarines to be built all over the place and then moved to any body of water that the Germans still had access to, Baltic, Black Sea, Mediterranean, or the North Sea, where they could be assembled and then used. Equipped as an Electro-Boat, the Type 23 would carry what was, for the time, an oversized battery compartment, which, together with the hull form, which was still optimized for underwater travel, if somewhat cruder than the Type 17, allowed for better performance subsurface than on the surface. In order to further accelerate construction, many existing parts were repurposed. The electrical drive systems of the Type 7C were taken, or more accurately, half of them were, since this design was a single screw. Diesel power came from a generator that was originally built to supply power to the Bismarck-class battleships. The only new technology in the propulsion train was a brand new low-speed electric motor that could be used for silent running. Bow hydroplanes were brought back in, as these didn't feature in the Type 17, and a vertical telescoping snorkel was built into the conning tower, as the more traditional lay-flat snorkel wouldn't work in a submarine that had very minimal hull casing. Although both the diesel and primary electric motors were capable of around about 600 horsepower apiece, the optimized hull form meant that the submarine was capable of about 10 knots on the surface, but about 13 knots underwater. Granted, this wasn't anywhere close to as fast as the Walter-powered boats, or even the Type 21, but Electro-Boats benefited significantly from scale, as rapidly increasing volume would grant significantly more battery space thanks to our old friend the square cube law, and the Type 23 was pretty small. The vessel actually only displaced around 230 to 240 tons on the surface, and about 260 tons when submerged, and its armament consisted of only 2 torpedoes preloaded into a pair of forward tubes, although these were at least full-sized torpedoes. Underwater endurance was found in testing to be about 4 times that of a Type 7C, and mass production was ordered, with the aim for 20 per month to be produced by May 1944. This was highly optimistic, and it's hardly surprising that that particular target was missed, in part because it was found that the first submarine assembled was actually negatively buoyant even with all the ballast tanks empty, as it turned out that far too much additional weight had been added since the last set of buoyancy calculations had been done. But in this case, the modular construction actually came to the rescue, since it proved to be relatively easy to fabricate a small additional hull section which restored the needed buoyancy and could be inserted between the living quarters and the bow. 6 submarines would finally reach operational service, although considerably more would be launched, Between them, they claimed 4 ships sunk over 8 or 9 patrols, albeit that the entirety of the lost tonnage added up to the equivalent of 1 Liberty ship, this being a product of their coastal operations and the smaller ships that you tended to find in these areas. These subs included U-2336, which sank the last Allied ships to be lost to German armed forces in World War II, when the Snelland 1 and Avondale Park was sunk off the coast of Scotland on the 7th of May 1945, the day before the official German formal surrender, but 2 days after Dönitz had ordered all the U-boats to stand down, the captain of U-2336 claiming that he hadn't received the order. Although none of the operational submarines would be lost, 7 others would be sunk before they could deploy on their first war patrol. 2 hit mines, 2 were sunk by aircraft, 2 were rammed by other U-boats, and 1 went out of control in a dive on a training exercise. Post-war, the Type 23s saw considerably less interest than the more advanced and somewhat larger Type 21s, although a few were kept for study or brief service in the French, British and Soviet navies, but all of these were gone for one reason or another within 5 years. That is at least until the late 1950s, when the West German Navy decided they were going to raise U-2365 and U-2367, refitting them and recommissioning them into service, where they would serve for almost a decade before their loss in a storm and scrapping, respectively, in the mid-1960s.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.